also have a question. Where do I point the thing? Just a minute. Okay. First of all, good evening. Sorry, microphone. Okay, good evening. As several people have said, I would like to share with you a bit about what God is doing in Germany, and through me and through the opportunities that He's given me. Even though Tom just said that I'd like to talk about some of the good things, I would also, if it's okay, like to talk about some of the negative things that have happened, just because it's part of life, and it's been a big part of the past couple of years for me. So I don't want to focus just on negative things, but I would like to share a few things like that. And one other thing, I tend to speak quickly anyway, and so if I speak too fast, please wave your hand or something, and I'll try to slow down a bit. So when I was here in March of last year, I mentioned that I had just been offered the opportunity to move from Bremen, Germany, to Leipzig, which is in the east. Those stars there, that star up in the top left is Bremen. And after I left the States in early April last year, I spent a lot of time praying and thinking about this decision to go and join a church plant in Leipzig. There had been two couples working there for about 6 years, and one of the couples was getting ready to return to the U.S. And I had been having, quite frankly, a pretty difficult time in Bremen. I had been there for about 8.5 years by that point, and I was kind of reaching a point of burnout and had gone through some depression. And I started 2015 knowing that something had to change in my life. I was pretty convinced that God was not finished with me in Germany, but there had to be a change. And about 2 months later, my friends in Leipzig contacted me and said, "Would you consider coming to join us?" And my need for a change in Bremen partly played into the decision to go to Leipzig. So November of last year, I made this transition. Went from a stable congregation in Bremen of about 45 people, and for Germany, that's a fairly large congregation. Bremen is probably the third largest of about 30 to 35 congregations in the country. I also moved from the former West Germany to the former East Germany, which plays a large role in the culture. Even though the country reunited 25 years ago, there is still, all those years of communism have really affected the mentality. And at this point, about anyone under the age of, say, 30 to 35 doesn't remember too much of that, but most of the people you interact with on a daily basis grew up under communism. Also went from a place that basically speaks standard German to a place that has multiple dialects. And when I moved, I had been learning and speaking German for 19 years by that point. And I first got to Leipzig and I thought, what language are these people speaking? That alone provided a challenge. And also went from the predominantly Lutheran region in northern Germany to this former communist territory. And I don't know how much you know about communism, but generally most of the people are raised as atheists. And so most of the people that we interact with on a daily basis don't have much of a background of Christianity. And so when I first went to Leipzig in November of last year, one of the main task at the beginning was to help Larry and Pam Sullivan, who had been in the state of Saxony, Germany for about 24 years, to help them to have a smooth transition back to the States. And in May of this year, they moved to Abilene, Texas. So this was a bit of a shock to the system for a lot of people who had considered them spiritual mentors. Over those 24 years, they had had a lot of had a very large impact on a lot of people's lives. And so we've also been trying to help those people cope a bit with their leaving. And the other couple that decided to stay was Mark and Karen Abercrombie. I have known them for 13 years. We met in Searcy, Arkansas, when I was working at the Harding Library, and Mark was in the Harding School of Biblical Studies at that time, a 2-year training program for non-traditional college students. And then they were in Bremen for 2 years. They went to Bremen about the same time I did, and they were there for 2 years before moving to the east. And then Annalisa Perry is also there. She and her family were in Leipzig from 2002 to 2007 trying to start a congregation there. And they ended up coming back to the States. And then in 2009, 2010, the Abercrombies and Sullivans decided to go there. And so most of the contacts that we've had have been from that time when the Perry family was in Leipzig. I titled this slide Transition as a Team because it's not easy to form a missions team, and forming a missions team on the field adds an extra challenge. Most missions teams form in the States. They train together, they get to know one another, they talk about common goals, and then they go to the mission field together. And we've done this totally different. And that alone has been a challenge for us. But God is working great things through us. We had a team retreat last month and talked about things like conflict resolution, about our personalities and the gifts that God's given us, and how can we use those things to serve the Lord together. Aside from Mark and Karen, who happened to be in the U.S. when this picture was taken, these are the people who are at church in Leipzig on an average Sunday. There are a few other people who come off and on, but we have about 8 or 9 of us on an average Sunday in Leipzig. And Sven, the tall man in the blue shirt in the back, actually lives in the city of Chemnitz, which is about an hour's drive away. He's very involved with the church in Chemnitz. And in Chemnitz, the church meets in the morning, and in Leipzig, we meet in the afternoon for worship. And so he generally drives an hour on Sundays to Leipzig to encourage us and to fellowship with us. Oh, and one more thing. In this picture, believe it or not, there are 4 nationalities represented. Annalise is American, Sven and Gerald are German, Mahmoud is from Syria, and Anthony is Nigerian. So we have a very blended group. One of my main tasks in Leipzig has been to help with the Let's Start Talking follow-up that from different Let's Start Talking teams they've had over the years. Maybe you know a bit about Let's Start Talking, but essentially the program uses text from the Bible. Most of the time people start out in Luke, and they read those passages with people in English to give them a chance to practice their language skills. And for Christians, it's a chance to introduce people to the Bible. So Elisabeth is one of the women that I've been meeting with. She is a retired opera singer, which has been really cool to hear some of her stories. But it's also provided an opportunity for me to study hymns with her. She sometimes has trouble with the Bible text, but because of her love of music, we've taken some traditional hymns like Amazing Grace, for example, that have also been translated into German. And we've compared the two, and it helps her to better understand the English, and we can talk about the message of the hymn. And she has had a lot of very difficult struggles in her life in the past couple of years, and one thing we've been doing lately is praying together, which for me has been it's been an encouragement, because that's a sign of progress when she realizes that the Lord does hear us and that he can answer prayers and help us with the troubles we're having. This is Krista and Mariana. Krista in the blue is 89, and Mariana is 76. They have been an amazing example to me of the fact that you are never too old to learn new things. Krista, the 89-year-old, regularly attends an English class, and she meets with me just to practice her language skills, and she's learning to use a computer. So you're never too old to learn things. They grew up during World War II, and of course experienced the aftermath of that, and then the transition to communism. Krista worked as a Russian translator for the Russians. And because of their age and just because of where they grew up, communism has had I would say an extra heavy influence on their worldview. It's been difficult sometimes to help them to really understand what Scripture is trying to say. And like most of the people I meet with, they say again and again, I grew up as an atheist. I don't have any knowledge of who Abraham is. Never heard of Abraham, never heard of Moses, never heard of the Apostle Paul. And Germans in other part of the country have at least heard of Paul, King David, Moses. Many of them go through religion class at school, and these people in the East haven't experienced any of that. I unfortunately don't have pictures of the other three ladies I've been meeting with, but Michaela is one of them. She's in her mid-40s and talks about there being a spiritual force, and that she sometimes prays to this force. And I'm pretty sure that comes from her grandmother, who has had a spiritual influence in her life. She is one of the few Eastern Germans who has been active in the Lutheran Church. And so her grandmother has played a role in at least helping her to develop an interest in spiritual things. And Michaela's colleague, Romy, has also been meeting with me, though I've had more trouble with her getting past just the interest in English and really getting her to see her need to I have German words in my head all of a sudden, to think more about the Bible and to deal with the text. And Inez has been a really exciting lady to meet with. She's also in her mid-40s, and she's a physics and math teacher. And her analytical mind is I think what has helped her to have this great interest in the details and the connections of the Bible. A lot of people who read the Let's Start Talking texts just take each passage for what it is, and Inez asks questions. Well, how is that person connected to this one? What happened in that place? What about this? And so we've pulled out the Bible and read other passages just because she's interested. And it's been really exciting to experience that with her. Something else that I've continued to do is teaching. We've had some difficulty developing a women's Bible class in Leipzig, but this year I spoke at both the German and the Austrian women's retreats. And I think Neville or any Bible class teacher or just any teacher would tell you that when you prepare a lesson, you learn so much more than you could ever share with anybody when you actually give the lesson. And so this has been something that's also been an encouragement to me and a help in growing myself spiritually. And I'm still on the planning team for the European Singles Retreat. This retreat meets each year in April and September for a long weekend. And these are pictures from the retreat this past September. We're already working on the April retreat, and a preacher from Lausanne, Switzerland will be joining us. This has also been a great ministry for me to develop connections around Europe. The retreat happens in English because it is a European retreat and people come from all different countries. And it's been a great way to connect with Christians in other places and to also try to encourage some of them. Most of the congregations in Europe are very small, and some of these singles are the only single people in their congregations. There may be a couple of families with them, and a lot of them just feel very lonely. So it's been a great way to encourage, and not only them, but also myself. And this summer we had 3 interns from Harding. This is Jessica, Lauren, and Shelby. They were with us for about 3 months. And this was also a new thing for me to realize that I'm at a stage of my life where I can be an encouragement and an example to younger women. And so we had a really great time with them this summer. They were very excited to learn and experience everything, and they did some Bible reading with some of our contacts. They encouraged some of the Christians in the church, and it was a really great experience to have them with us. And then in, the last week of October, I had a really amazing opportunity. There were several churches that were very, very generous and paid for 19 women who work in ministry to attend a conference in Athens, Greece. And one of the women in the picture has been doing work in Vienna, Austria, and also in Zagreb, Croatia, since the mid-70s. And she's never married, and she has a passion for encouraging women who work in ministry. And she came up with the idea to do this. As far as we know, this is the first time that anything like this has happened. And so we spent a week in Athens. And for me, this was also a very new experience because it really focused on missionary care. I think that's kind of a term that's been used a lot in the past few years. But basically, it wasn't about having in-depth Bible studies. It was about talking about things like how to deal with stress, how to avoid burnout, looking at your holistic health, that emotional and spiritual health is just as important as physical health. And there were a couple of counselors there that we could talk with if we wanted to. And it was a really amazing experience. I knew a few of the women before I went, at least the women who work in Europe. Some of you may remember Jody Luke, who attended here about 15 years or so ago. She was also there. She's been working in Scotland, and it was really great to see her again and to catch up with her. The man on the right there is Dino Roussos, and he is a preacher at the congregation in Athens, and he was a great tour guide. This picture is in ancient Corinth. We spent a day walking through Corinth and then going to Mars Hill and to the Acropolis in Athens, and to walk in the footsteps of Paul was just an amazing experience. I don't know how many of you have done that, but it brought scripture to life for me. And another exciting thing about it was that when I returned to Leipzig with Elizabeth, for example, not long after I got back, we were reading in Acts 17, and I could say, I went to Mars Hill, and I showed her pictures and said, this is where Paul was when he was saying this, and this is what he was seeing. And so that's why he said what he did. And so that was a really encouraging experience for me, that I could take the encouragement and the comfort that I found at this conference, and that some of that could be transferred to the work in Leipzig. So, the biggest news, this is Justin Donner, and he and I have been getting to know each other and dating long distance for the past almost 2 years. He is French-American, and he is a preacher in Marseille, France. And the church in Marseille also has a type of Bible school. It's basically a ministry apprenticeship program that has Bible classes, and he's also been teaching in that program. And this past summer, we decided that if our relationship is going to have a future, that we need to be in the same city. The long distance thing, as some of you know, is pretty hard. And so we made the decision to move to Cologne. And that might seem like it's coming out of left field, but we decided that after a lot of prayer that the best thing for us would be for both of us to move and to start over together, rather than for one of us to come into the world of the other person. He already speaks German, and he did an apprenticeship or an internship with the congregation in Cologne in the spring of last year. And I know several people from the church there. So in October, we went to visit the congregation and talked with them about what we might be able to contribute to the work there. It was a very encouraging visit. We were welcomed with open arms, and we talked about different ministry opportunities that we might be able to assist with. So, at the end of January, I am moving to Cologne. One of the very negative things from the past year has been a situation with my roommate. It's really been an emotionally and sometimes verbally abusive situation, and thankfully she moved out about a month and a half ago and gave me back the key, but because of our lease situation, I have to move at the end of January. So Justin and I decided that since I have to move then anyway, that we'll go ahead and take the leap and move to Cologne at the end of January. The past couple months have been pretty busy because of that. This trip to the States was already planned, and so I tried to pack as much of my apartment as I could before I left, because I'll return to Leipzig on January 11th, and then I have to be out of the apartment by the end of January. So I only have a few weeks when I get back to finish taking care of everything. A couple weeks ago, my coworkers Mark and Karen met with my landlord's realtor to let people look at my apartment. It's a bit of a crazy situation, so I would really appreciate your prayers for all of this. But when I move to Cologne, I will be going to a different culture. Someone in Cologne told me, when you move to Cologne, you probably will miss Germany. And if you'll notice on the map there, Cologne is not that far from Belgium, and also Napoleon's troops had occupied Cologne for a while, and so there is a very large French influence on the Cologne culture. That's another reason that Justin and I talked about Cologne, is because it will be kind of like we're meeting in the middle culturally. And the population is a little over 1 million, which is about double the size of Leipzig. And when you're there, you feel like you're in a big city. I mean, it's very, a bit like, I've never been to New York City, but it's a bit like movies I've seen from New York. People bustling everywhere. And it's also a much different congregation than the one in Leipzig. The congregation in Cologne has been there for, I don't know exactly how many years, but I believe since the 70s. And it's a fairly stable congregation, and so I'll be going from a church plant to a stable congregation, which is really also something that Justin and I really felt we needed. And another good thing about Cologne is that because of the location, they have contact with other congregations in the region. They sometimes meet with congregations in Belgium, and they're not very far from the church in Wiesbaden or the one in Mannheim, and so they sometimes get together, and that's something that not everyone in Germany has, because congregations tend to also be far apart. And this is a picture of the church in Cologne, of the congregation, from when Justin was there in the spring of last year. So it's not a huge congregation, especially, based on American standards, but for Germany, that's a fairly good size. And this is, Zach and Alyssa Murphy have been working there with the church for about 2 years now. They also provide a very positive aspect to this transition for me and Justin. All four of us are within about 2 years of each other, age-wise. And Justin and I have both experienced how difficult it can be to work with people from different generations. And for me, it's exciting because Zach and Alyssa are both from the Midwest. Alyssa is actually from the Dayton area, so we have some things in common. And we've already spent some time getting to know each other. I've played cards together, and so we're looking forward to working with them. And as far as what Justin and I will be able to do in Cologne, one thing that we'll be able to do is to help with refugees. You may have heard about the refugee situation in Europe, but basically this is the worst refugee situation that Europe has dealt with since World War II. Last year alone, in 2015, Germany received 890,000 asylum seekers, And of course, not all of those will be approved. Not all of them will be able to stay. But they're estimating that close to 1 million more people are coming, or have come, or are coming in 2016. So throughout Germany, especially Germany, because that's where most of them want to go, there is a great need for helping them integrate into the culture, teaching German, helping them deal with the German bureaucracy, helping them find apartments. And these people are not in Cologne, but it's an example of the opportunities that Christians are having with refugees. On the left, that's a picture I took when I was in Athens in October. Athens is really this gateway between Europe, Northern Africa, and Asia. And they have been great at really developing programs to deal with the church there has really been great at developing programs to help the refugees. And the man in the black is from Afghanistan, and he's been in Greece for several years. He's become a Christian, and he reaches out to other Farsi-speaking refugees. And when I was, on that Sunday I was there, he baptized an Iranian man who was also there as a refugee. Mahmoud, who is in Leipzig, is a refugee from Syria, and he's been in Germany for about 1.5 years now. And I know also that the church in Bremen recently baptized an Iranian couple. So with the refugees coming to Europe, it's almost like a new mission field has been brought to Europe. Rather than Christians having to go there, which they really can't do legally, these people are coming to Europe. And it's a great chance for churches to reach out to them and to help them not only with humanitarian needs, but also just with spiritual needs. And so because Cologne is a large city, Cologne has received a lot of refugees. The church there is already doing some work with them, and that's something that Justin and I will be able to help with. Real quick. Something else I hope to do is to start a vacation Bible school there, like I did in Bremen. Maybe you remember I did that for 6 years in Bremen. I would love to be able to do that again. And Justin will also be helping with preaching. And the congregation there has done work with Let's Start Talking, and they do have a need for people to help with people who want to continue reading. So we'll be able to do that as well. As far as my needs, I really need a lot of prayer right now. There's a lot of stress happening in my life with the transition, as far as getting back to Germany in January and moving by the end of the month. Also need prayer for wisdom for my relationship with Justin as we work to develop ministry together, as we consider what the future looks like for us. There's just a lot of things to think about. And also I would appreciate it if you would pray for the churches in Leipzig and Marseille. When Justin and I leave, there will be a little bit of a hole there in the work. And every congregation has its needs anyway of strengthening the Christians and encouraging them and continuing to spread God's word. So please pray for these churches as we leave. And also for the new work, that Justin and I will see how we can serve the Lord in Cologne, and that we will see what doors God is opening for us there. And I'd also appreciate it if you would pray for my current apartment situation. Not only is my landlord trying to find new people to move in, but everything with my roommate is not fully settled. We have to deal with giving back the key and everything in January, and part of me is a little nervous that she might cause a few problems with that, but I'm praying that God will encourage her to be reasonable. Also, with moving, there are additional costs that come. As far as renting a moving van, because I have not had time to look for an apartment in Leipzig or in Cologne, I will be living from the end of January in a small apartment that belongs to the church there, and that way I'll have time to be there in the city looking for an apartment. But while I do that, I have to store my furniture and the things that I can't fit in that small apartment. And in moving, there are some things that I need to replace. I've been in Germany for 10 years now, and when I went, I got a lot of things at used appliance and furniture stores, and there are a few of those things that I'm needing to replace. And because of commitments that some people have made, there's about $200 per month in support that I'm needing to find a way to replace. And most of all, I need encouragement. Send me an email. Let me know what's happening in your life, and that's an encouragement to me to know how you're doing and to know what the church here is involved in. So anyway, that's a bit about my life right now. Like I said, there's a lot happening, but the Lord has been good to me. He's used this time in Leipzig to help me to learn where my strengths are and where my needs are, and to learn to depend on Him. So does anybody have any questions? I know it's a lot of information, but. In most of Germany, you can get around pretty well with public transportation. Leipzig and Cologne both have streetcar or tram systems, as well as small regional trains, which sometimes act as subways. And then you can get around the whole country with the long-distance, high-speed trains. And I also walk a lot, and I have a bicycle. So. Most of them were raised as atheists. I mean, under communism, they basically say there is not a God, and so most of them were raised as atheists. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, definitely with any person you're studying the Bible with, you have to look at where that person is at. You know, there's not a one-size-fits-all form of evangelism. So I agree, sometimes it's easier to talk about God's word with people who are coming from that place. And while most of these people were raised as atheists, since they've now been in a non-communist country for 25 years now, I think a lot of them have started in some ways to think about things, and their worldview has been broadened. They're allowed to travel now. Before, they were only allowed to travel to other countries in the communist bloc in Eastern Germany. And so they're experiencing more of the world. Inez, the math teacher, for example, went to Italy earlier this year for vacation, and she came back with pictures that she took of artwork in churches. And she said, "I saw this picture. Is that the Judas that we were talking about at the Last Supper?" And she makes these connections, and these people didn't have those opportunities before. So I think that even though they've come out of that atheist background, they are moving away from it in some cases. Mm.
Actually, in some ways, you have less prejudice, but you're the first Christian maybe they come up with.
A number of Germans have told me that even though they live in a nominally Christian country, that I'm basically the first Christian they've met who practices their faith. Yeah, right. Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share a bit about what God's doing, and wish you all a Merry Christmas and God's many blessings for the new year.